It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, folks, today we're going to jump on the gigantic, sharp, interactive board. I want to share my thoughts on HP's third quarter. You'll notice right off the bat that I had to borrow the picture of the bull taking a poop from my Konica Minolta presentation. I got to use it here on HP's presentation because there's some bullshit going on here. I'll share my thoughts on that. But I don't know if you've heard the CEO of HP, give an interview regarding his third quarter earnings call yet. I mean, he likes to go out there and do the interviews. And, I stopped watching because they're just full of nonsense. I mean, how many times can the guy talk about putting AI in PCs before he bores everybody out of their mind? But I'm sure that he didn't talk about the fact that HP produced its worst operating profit in the third quarter of FY 2025 than they have in 19 straight quarters. You got to go back to the fourth quarter of 2020 to find a worse operating profit. And I'm sure he didn't talk about that. I'm sure that he didn't talk about the fact that the print business is down $450 million if you compare the first 9 months of FY 2024 to the first 9 months of FY 2025. So in today's episode, let's talk about some of the stuff that the CEO of HP just refuses to talk about. We'll start out with their top line revenue. It was $13,932 million. They had a 7.1% operating profit. And yes, my friends, I had to go back to the fourth quarter of FY 20 to find a worse operating profit than that. And it was 6.9% that quarter. But the third quarter for FY 2025, HP produced its worst operating profit than it's had in 19 straight quarters. This is where I wanted to get the bull taking a poop because I'm so sick of this slide. I mean, seriously, HP, this is just nonsense. I mean, you could show all this crap all you want. You could talk about consumer subscriptions, industrial graphics in 3D, and workforce solutions. But if you don't give us the math behind all the pretty pictures, it's all irrelevant. Basically, it's all bull poop, seriously. I mean, you talk about consumer subscriptions, and you look at the print supply revenue falling off a cliff. You look at the consumer print hardware revenue falling off a cliff. You got to ask yourself, is this just a bunch of bull poop? Because a lot of people are asking that, I'm sure. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the printing business for the first 9 months of FY 2025 compared to the first 9 months of FY 2024, it's down $450 million. If you look at the personal systems, it's up by $1,575 million. That's good, but it ain't up enough to offset the losses in the print revenue. Folks, it's the print revenue where all the operating profit is. Speaking of operating profit, if you look at the first 3 quarters of 2025 to the first 3 quarters of 2024, and you come up with an average operating profit in the personal systems, the average is down by 1.1%. The company overall is down by 1.2%. If you look at the average for the print business, it's 18.6%. It's pretty much flat from where it was in 2024. But folks, here's an issue. In the third quarter of 2025, the print operating profit was 17.3%. It was the same in the third quarter of FY 2024. But I'm going to tell you all what I've told you before. When the blended operating profit at HP gets to be 6%, that's when all hell's going to break loose. That's my prediction. And I've been talking about that for a while, and I think that day's going to come a lot quicker than the folks think it might. If you look at the revenue decline, and I've showed all this many times, but HP had a couple of big years, 21 and 22, and since then they haven't really done anything spectacular except continue to evaporate revenue and operating profit. I mean, if you look in 2021, if you compare that to the FY 2024, they're down $9,828 million. And keep in mind, in that time frame, they added $1.7 billion in poly revenue. So I urge these other analysts out there to go and look at HP's numbers and talk about this stuff. Don't let them off the hook with this. I know their CEO loves to go out there and talk about how AI is going to change everything. I wish it would change their numbers, but I don't see it doing it. When you look at the key metrics in the printing business, supply revenue down 4%, total hardware units down 9%, consumer printing revenue down 8%, commercial printing revenue down 3%. It's always down. And it doesn't matter how many subscriptions this guy talks about. Well, he never talks about how many they're actually selling. He just uses the word like it's some big, great thing they're doing over there. You look at the personal systems and all the AI talk and the computers and all that stuff, and they got a CRN AI award. Wow. It doesn't seem to add enough value to increase profitability over there, though, right? You know, their operating profit is getting less and less in the personal systems business. Folks, there's a lot of pressure in that space. That's a commodity marketplace. You know, I've showed their 10Qs and 10Ks and went through some comparison for years after years. And folks, I just want to show you one big number that really jumped off the page at me. If you look at their consumer printing, this would be the hardware, consumer printing, small stuff, the Soho stuff, right? Ladies and gentlemen, it's down 52% from 2019's number. 52%. That's huge. And all this talk about subscriptions and all that, wouldn't that be the machine that was getting the subscriptions, right? They're not selling subscriptions in office printing, right? They're not selling subscriptions in the commercial printing space. They're selling that in the consumer space. And again, I questioned a lot around that, like how many are active, how many are inactive, what's the average price of these subscriptions, all the stuff they never want to talk about. But if you look at their supply business from 2019, it's down 13%. So we're not doing any home runs with those subscriptions, are we? Ladies and gentlemen, in supplies for the 9 months, if you compare the first 9 months of 2024 to the first 9 months of 2025, here's the numbers in the print space. Supplies are down $275 million. Commercial printing is down $155 million. And consumer printing is down $20 million for the total of $450 million. You know, I project right now today that the print business is going to end up being down about $3.3 billion when it ends FY 2025 from where it was in 2021, their big boom year. They're going to be down by $3.3 billion. And that's a pretty damn big number, right? Because, folks, if you do a little math on that, $627 million in operating profit loss on $3.3 billion in lost revenues, generating a 19% operating profit. So if they're down $3.3 billion and the print average is about 19% operating profit, that means realistically they just lost $627 million in operating profit. HP would need to produce an additional $12.5 billion in personal systems revenues with at least a 5% operating profit to generate the loss of the $627 million in operating profit from the print business. That's huge, and they're not going to do it. I mean, you saw where they're at, right? They're up by $1.6 billion so far, 9 months into this year. That's not enough. And ladies and gentlemen, they're going to get pressure from competitors in that compute space. You know, their CEO can run around and buy all the shares he wants. He loves to buy back his own shares. And I've said this before, but you know, after he's long gone and retires, people are going to look at his tenure and say he was a corporate raider. He was one of the worst ones in the history of HP. Seriously, this whole thing with these share buy, it's getting to a point of absurdity. And think of all that he could have spent that money on. $14 billion buying back their own shares. Wow. I got to show this slide again. I hope I can inspire that leadership over there at HP to share the real realities behind all of this. Tell us what's going on with hybrid system, advanced compute solutions, AI in the PCs. Holy crap. Why don't you start, telling the whole world how many laptops you're actually selling? Because you remember, HP stopped sharing that when they stopped selling a whole lot of laptops, right? Folks, when I see stuff like this, I don't care if it's from Konica Minolta or HP. What I see, well, is a bull taking a poop. And everybody watching me knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck there, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.